All right, we're going to get started. It is after 7 o'clock. Thank you so much for coming and helping us celebrate Arbor Week 2019. This is the first time that we're spreading Arbor Day out for an entire week. And if you can, it'd be great for you to come tomorrow about noon. We're going to be doing a proclamation. We're unveiling signs, interpretive signs at the root over by the Oval, and we're going to have a tree planting. It's going to be great fun. So that's going to be happening tomorrow.
Karen, and I'm going to interrupt.
Yeah.
Because everybody doesn't know where the root is.
Oh,
the root.
Right.
It's right there.
There you go. That's awesome. Look, we got a picture.
North of Main Hall, west of the University Center. TV burners over here, for those of you who know. So
Perfect.
It's right there. Sorry.
No, I love the visual aid. That's awesome. So tonight we have a panel discussion, and it is Trees and Climate Change Think Locally. This presentation is being reported by Missoula Community Access Television as a part of a media assistance grant donated to the state of Montana Arboretum by MCAT. Please extend a thanks to our MCAT videographer tonight, Ron Scholl. Thank you. And a big thanks to other organizations who have partnered with us for Arbor Week at the State of Montana Arboretum: Trees for Missoula, the White Bark Pine Ecosystem Foundation, Climate Smart Missoula, the UM Environmental Studies Program, and of course the W.A. Franke College of Forestry and Conservation. If any of you were fortunate enough to be here on Tuesday night, we had a wonderful discussion and presentation by Solomon Dabrowski about Trees and Climate Change Think Globally. And he took us way back in history and time and how trees can, just really reading tree rings and looking through soil, how we can see how climate and trees work together and affected each other. It was just really fascinating. And it was recorded on MCAT, and so it will be on MCAT within about a month or so. So keep an eye out for that on their listings, please. I've got a great group of people here. My panelists today are experts from our area, from Missoula. We're so lucky to have so many great people here. First of all, I should probably introduce myself. I'm Karen Sippy. I am Executive Director of Trees for Missoula. We're a volunteer advocacy group for the urban forest. So I go around and just talk about trees all the time, and I love it. So if you ever need someone to talk about trees, I'm your gal. We've got on my right here first is Nick Silverman. He is a faculty affiliate and adjunct professor with the College of Forestry and Geosciences Department at the University of Montana. He studies the interactions between water, climate, and vegetation across the landscape. He was a co-author of the 2017 Montana State Climate Assessment and led the climate analysis for that report. He has a PhD in hydroclimatology from the University of Montana and also works as a water resources engineer throughout Montana and the Pacific Northwest. To his right is Jamie Kirby. She is the Urban and Community Forestry Program Manager for the Montana Department of Natural Resources and Conservation, DNRC. In that role, she empowers Montana communities and people by enabling them to improve the health of their community through managing and caring for trees in their urban settings. Jamie has a BS in Forest Resource Management from the University of Montana. She has been a wildland fire prevention and education specialist and is a certified arborist. She serves on the Montana Urban and Community Forestry Association and University of Montana Arboretum Committee. She's one of us. Amy Sillenberg, on the end here, is the Executive Director of Climate Smart Missoula, where she advocates for climate solutions and works to build community resiliency and local statewide networks. Amy helped launch Climate Smart in 2015, following efforts to develop Missoula's municipal and community climate action plans. She has worked on climate and energy policy and wildlife conservation for over a decade, much of this at Montana Audubon. Amy has an MS degree in wildlife biology from the University of Montana, where she was Assistant Director of the Avian Science Center. So we've got a bunch of pros here. Right? This is great. We're going to, how we're going to work this today is each one of the panelists is going to give us a little 10 or so minute presentation of what they're bringing to the table tonight. And then I have some questions that I've already come up with, and we're going to open this up to have a discussion with everyone. And they all have gotten to know each other or know each other, and they'll be having a discussion as well, talking about climate change and trees, specifically in Missoula and our surrounding area, our traditional wildland forest and our urban forest. So I'm going to hand it off to Nick.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you all for being here. How's my voice? Okay, good. So I'm going to talk a little about trees, but a lot about climate and climate change, and sort of set the background for some other conversations after me about what we can do about all this. So if it seems a little doom and gloom, that's okay. We'll follow it up by a bunch of positive things that that we can do here locally. So let me get my little presentation up here.
Did we turn the lights down yesterday?
Yeah, I know. It's back there.
Yeah, so as Karen mentioned, I helped with the state climate assessment that came out in December 2017. And so a lot of the stuff that I'll be showing you are data and results from that. But if you guys want more, there is a whole chapter in there on forestry, so climate change impacts on forestry, that I would encourage you all to go check out, and that's at montanaclimate.org. So lots of information there. I'm just going to skim the surface here tonight. So raise your hand if you've seen this curve before. This is, yeah, you should. This is the Keeling curve. It's CO2 particulates in the atmosphere measured at Mauna Loa in Hawaii. And as you can see, they've been measuring CO2 in the atmosphere since 1958, I think. And they're going up. So they're going up exponentially. And we know this. These are direct measurements and observations that we've been making for quite some time now. Okay, so beyond them exponentially increasing, you also notice these little squiggles. Do you guys know why those squiggles are there? Yeah?
Seasonal change in exhale and inhaling of the, basically the flora in the oceans and the forests.
Yeah, exactly. It is a large part of the trees. It's the inhale and the exhale of the trees. Most of our trees are in the northern hemisphere. That's why they align with our seasons. But you can imagine this impact is even bigger when you think that the southern hemisphere is actually buffering this signal. So, the point here is, one, carbon emissions are going up. We know this for a fact. And two, trees have a big part in our global carbon concentration in the atmosphere. So, carbon traps heat, along with other greenhouse gases. And so they act sort of as a, I like to use the analogy like a sweater. So greenhouse gases are natural. They're a good thing. However, it's kind of like adding a sweater when you go outside. One is nice and maybe you feel nice and comfortable, but if you keep adding another layer and another layer and another jacket, eventually it gets too warm. And as you can see from our carbon emissions and other greenhouse gas emissions, that's kind of what we're doing. We're adding these layers and things are getting really warm. So what I'm showing here, this is just kind of the new way to visualize the same old data. This is temperature change from historical, from 1850 all the way to present. And it's represented by colors. The cool colors are obviously cooler temperatures all the way up to present with the warmer colors here. So it really emphasizes this has been a very recent big change. And in fact, the last 5 years, we've had the 5 hottest years on the planet. And you can see that by the dark colors here. So here in Montana, the story is very similar. We've also seen increasing annual temperatures across the state since the 1800s. In fact, we've seen about a 2 degrees Fahrenheit increase over this time. And, you know, one thing I think that really drives this point home, I often give this talk to high school students, and when I talk to them, I realize that they have actually never experienced an average Montana year in terms of temperature. So the last time we had an average year as far as temperature goes across Montana was 1996. Every year since 1996 has been above the historical average. Okay, so I'm going to jump into some of the results from the climate assessment. And these are projections. I'm going to show you the mid-century projections. These are the business as usual, so this is sort of assuming we continue doing what we're doing. Keep in mind this is the average over, we use about 20 different models. And I'll tell you with the temperature, especially with the temperature and even the precipitation as well, we actually have 100% agreement across every single model across the globe that temperature in Montana is going to increase. So, you know, when people say there's large uncertainty with climate change, there might be some uncertainty on how much it's going to increase, but there's really not a lot of uncertainty that it is going to increase here in Montana. So this is the change in average annual temperature here in Montana. It's this dark orange, dark red. It's about a 6-degree Fahrenheit increase over historical conditions is what we're projecting by mid-century. This is the change in the number of days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, so those really hot days. You can see in the eastern part of the state, they're looking at the larger changes of about over a month, and then here in the western part of the state, we're still looking at about a 2-week difference there. And then also in the change in the number of freeze-free days, so these are those days that used to freeze and are projected to no longer freeze. We're looking at about a month and a half difference here in the western part of the state, and still over about a month in the eastern part of the state. So when we break this up across the year, since we're really focused in Missoula here, you can kind of disregard everything except for that very top line, or top series of boxes, and those are by month, and that's just the projected change there. You can see that the largest changes are expected to occur in the summer. And that's important, and we'll probably get into that a little bit later, but obviously increases throughout the year, all months. So talk a little bit about precipitation. Precipitation is what we call a second order effect from these greenhouse gas emissions. So in other words, greenhouse gas emissions trap more heat, temperature goes up. That increase in temperature affects evapotranspiration and soil moisture and the amount of water vapor that the atmosphere can hold, which then affects precipitation. So oftentimes there's a little bit more uncertainty around precipitation. There's also a little bit more of a lag effect as to when these changes will occur. But you can see our projections for mid-century business as usual are increases in precip across the year here in Montana for all of the regions of the state. So about 8 to 10% increase is what we are expecting. But when we break that up over the entire year by month, and again, just focus on that top row, that's the Northwest where we are, although it's similar patterns across all the regions, you can see, you see a little bit of that light beige brown color. That's a decrease. So increases in the winter and spring, and a little slight increase in the fall, but then also decreases in the summer. And so this seasonality, I think when we think about vegetation and trees and agriculture, this seasonality really matters when we get our rain. So what does this mean for Missoula trees? Well, I think we're going to talk more about that after me, so I won't get into it a whole lot, and maybe we can have a broader conversation. But the one point that I'll make from, you know, kind of a broader climate perspective is I'll ask you guys to think back to 2017. And if you remember, 2017 was kind of a wet winter, a wet spring, a very warm spring and warm winter, and a really hot summer and a really dry summer. And if you think back, that's pretty much what I was saying we can expect as an average mid-century. So these are the 2017 conditions. You can see winter on the left here. That's winter temperature differences from our average conditions. Like I was saying, wetter than normal winter, warmer than normal winter, much warmer than normal summer, and much drier than normal precip. So very similar to what we're projecting. And you can kind of think back, well, what did that mean? Well, it meant one of our worst wildfire seasons. Also meant pretty severe drought, especially in the eastern part of the state, but in the western part of the state as well. And I think what was particularly surprising is the speed at which the drought came on. Everybody thought we were doing pretty good, and our summers were we were set up really well for a nice summer and a pretty average wildfire season. But because of these temperatures, that water went away really quick. So they're kind of calling it a flash drought. So these are sort of some of the things that I just want to draw people's attention to as we talk more about trees and what this means here in Missoula. So lastly, I'll just leave it with this last slide going back to these lines. You know, essentially, we're at a point here where we have some decisions to make. And there was a recent report back in November by the United Nations that came out and said there are some very big differences between a 1.5 degrees Celsius warming and a 2 degrees Celsius warming, and it would behoove us to keep things as low as possible as far as that change. So I think this is a good place to leave it with my next panelist, and we can talk about some of the things that we can do, at least locally here. So thank you.
Do you have the copies up or? No. Yeah, this one.
Yep. And then when I click, we're just going for it.
I've just been doing the arrows in there.
Oh, just the arrow. Okay. All right, so I like to start my presentations just by saying trees are awesome. And this is how we're going to help mitigate some of the climate change situations that we have going on here. So what are some of the things that affect climate? Well, urban forests affect climate. They have an impact on how we can live congruently with, amongst nature. And then the difference between urban forests and natural forests are something I'd like to talk about as well. So urban forests are a little bit different. They're more parceled. They're detached from the landscape, really. So what I'm going to talk about is what the data is for what we study with urban forests. And why is it important to study an urban forest? Well, they're really a microclimate. And does anybody know what a microclimate is? Somebody does. I bet you do. Okay. Well, microclimates really are, they have their own impacts on weather, on temperatures, on shade, and this little small pocket in where we live. So our community here in Missoula lives in a microclimate. Okay, so I have to press this button now. So I'm going to go through these presentations, these slides, and talk about what do we have, what do we want, and how do we get what we want. So how do urban forests, I'll go to my next slide, work in Montana? Well, we didn't really know. So in 2009, we started collecting data. The DNRC started collecting data on urban forests. And we sent technicians throughout the state to collect community tree inventory. So these are all the publicly owned trees within each municipality. We collected a total of 61 inventories, compiled them, cleaned the data, and I'm lucky because I actually have my urban forest inventory specialist here in the audience, Karen Shelley, who is amazing at helping with this analysis. So over the course of, I think, a 7-year window, we took this data and contracted it out to a group that analyzed this. And we found out some amazing things. So here's just from the statistics of the 61 communities that we have here is we actually, this is a couple years old. This is from a 2017 analysis, so we have about 141,000 trees right now. But average for community is about 2,200. And I also had the privilege of getting a fact sheet, an individual fact sheet created for each community. So if you actually go to the DNRC website, you can find Google like urban forest inventory for Montana, and you can scroll and find your own community's information. And it's pretty cool. It looks like, I think I have Missoula's. So Missoula's is right here. I think I have some copies as well. But in it, you'll see all the information about the benefits of trees. And this is the good news. So that's what I want to share with you. All of the things like stormwater interception, how many, let's see, the pounds of air pollutants removed annually, carbon sequestered, energy savings. These are all things that were calculated and analyzed for Montana over the last couple of years. So one more data dump on you, and then I'm going to get into the fun. Why else did we collect this information? Well, we want to know what's at risk. So as you may or may not know, there's this bug, and it's called the emerald ash borer, and it's eking its way west. In fact, it's only about an hour's drive away from Wyoming, and it is in South Dakota now. And we have a lot of ash trees. That's what we discovered with this inventory. In fact, some communities have up to 70% of their urban forests are composed of ash. And why is that a little bit scary? That could mean that almost 70% of that community's forest could be wiped out by the emerald ash borer. That would be an extreme loss of canopy. So I'll try to, spare the bad news. This is, minimal for what I want to do for the bad news. I want to show the good news of what can we do with this information. So something that I found interesting with the findings of these results was where the species diversity spread across Montana, and what areas in Montana had a lot of ash and what areas didn't. So what we found was that just west of the Continental Divide, the percentage of ash species actually decreased quite a bit, and we had more prevalent species like maple trees. So this map shows you the green triangles are the ones that have low risk of emerald ash borer impact. And then, of course, the orange squares, moderate, and then the red dots are a high potential mortality of ash trees. So you'll notice, though, there's a big stripe in the center of Montana where most of the red circles are. And we just find that really interesting, that the corridors are another thing that we looked at, is the highway corridors of I-90 and I-15. So just some reasons why community members might go to their local nurseries and what nurseries may suggest might have to do with it, but also just where the stock is coming from, where the trees are coming from, and what can do well in Montana's climate. Montana's a harsh climate for a lot of trees to grow, and ash was a pretty popular species in recent history. So what do we do now with all of this information? Well, we have this data, we have some climate data, and I like to think, well, there's a lot of green infrastructure projects that we can do here that we need to think about, what can I do as an individual? Or how can I make a difference in my community? And I just want to stress that it's just starting small. In fact, I see the coolest projects happening in the small communities. So these projects here are from Montana. So the top one is from Stanford, Montana, and you'll see that they transformed this small little junky lot into a beautiful green space. So those are before and after pictures. The one in the middle is in Eureka, Montana. So we have this hardscape, this black pavement area, and just by adding some green infrastructure, I'll talk about the definition of that in a second, it completely transformed the area. The bottom picture is of Dillon, Montana,
And this is another example of brick pavements, which is permeable, so water can reach through the surface and get to those trees. But it just creates a more welcoming environment. And it also makes a big difference for those small communities. So when I say GI-related assessments, I'm talking about green infrastructure. And I'm going to share the definition of green infrastructure. So the definition of green infrastructure is a network providing the ingredients for solving urban and climatic challenges by building with nature. I really like that. That was a Wikipedia source. The second definition I found that I liked was preserving and restoring natural landscape features, such as forests, floodplains, and wetlands, and reducing the amount of land covered by impervious surfaces. So we have a lot of green infrastructure projects that I like to brag about all across the nation. All the urban forestry coordinators meet, and I brag about all of the cool projects. They always tell me, well, pick one project that you want to talk about, and I just can't. I never can. So you're getting a little sample of what I get all excited about when I go to my national meetings. Here's another project that we show for a lot of decision makers. So when communities and when groups are trying to get a project going, they have to usually go through city council, or they have to convince some people for funding, and they have to find a way to make the project happen. People are very visual. That's what we notice. So we're helping these groups, these communities, to show what the differences are and what it looks like on the ground. So there's some simulation and modeling demonstrations or software that can do this. So the top picture is, you can imagine this being an entryway into any town in Montana, right? Well, we say, well, imagine if we planted some trees and widened the planting space in the boulevard a little bit. What a difference would that make? That would slow down traffic speeds. It would be a little bit safer environment for people to want to start, biking and walking for their commutes. There's also a little planting section on the other side of the road. Well, what if we even took that further? And we created bike lanes and a median strip in the middle of the road. Even more of an impact. So we just show how important it is, and the safety as well with having trees. The bottom picture on the left is actually, I don't know if you can look close enough, but could anybody identify which community that is in Montana? Yes, why do you know?
Because there's a big hole.
There's a big hole. We did a canopy assessment in Butte. So there's different ways that we can analyze the green infrastructure. So the coverage here is just showing the differences. The red is very low. I think it's very low vegetation, probably impervious surfaces. And then the greener you get, the more vegetation you have. This picture here is another example of software that we have used, and this is All Chiefs Park in Browning, Montana. And we took this picture. This is, of course, animated now with trees, and we wanted to show the tribal council what the difference could be if we added trees to their park. So again, just very visual. That's how people understand what the difference of trees can mean when we're faced with hard infrastructure versus soft. So some more local projects. You might recognize this one. And this is working with water. I just wanted to touch on this because I knew Nikki would be here. But what a cool project. I just love monitoring this one. So this is a poplar plantation over on Mullen Road. This is where this person is using wastewater, sewer wastewater, to water these trees. So talk about nutrient-rich stuff. And these are hybrid poplars that he's growing for multiple purposes. And they are growing, I've heard, about 8 feet a year. They're just growing like crazy. So the last picture I had, so those were seedlings. Those were when they were first planted, and they're being irrigated. And this was just a few years ago. And you can see the person, I think that's Mark Vandermeer, hiding in amongst the poplar trees. And I believe they're much taller than that even now. Much. Working with hardscapes. So sometimes we have to retrofit green infrastructure into our current environment. And it's just working in cooperation with the other departments around municipalities. So we have, the Public Works Department, we have Parks and Recreation. We want to all team up and work on how we plan when we design these types of systems to work around trees and still be ADA accessible. So this is Livingston, Montana, and they found a system of design for sidewalks to work around the current trees. And then, of course, then there's the, I don't know if many of you recognize the other location. So this is in Missoula, and this is our first set of Silva cells in the state. So Missoula has they bought, with a grant from DNRC, we designed this place where you can plant a tree under sidewalks, where it's basically, I call it like rebar for sidewalks. So you're having structural soil, so you don't compact any of the area underneath, and you're allowing for full root growth of this tree underneath the surface. And so what you don't see with this picture, well, I'll show you what you don't see.
Jane, excuse me,
Yeah.
what was the name of the product again?
Silva cells.
Silva.
Yes. So there's a picture of Karen and I when the project was underway. And so this is what it looks like under the sidewalks. And these are helping maintain the soil. There's some fill above that as well, some backfill of soil. And it's giving this tree the potential to grow to its full growth, its full level, because most trees in urban areas do not ever reach their full potential. In fact, the average lifespan of most urban trees is around 13 to 30 years. It depends on the area. Downtown areas are more harsh than residential areas. Functionality is another project that a lot of the like Highline communities in Montana work for, and Eastern Montana. So we have shelter belts, multi-functional shelter belts. And the top examples are, so the one on the left is of Shelby, and they also received a grant from DNRC to purchase and install solar power drip irrigation. So the system is self-sufficient because it's in a remote area. The picture on the right is of Butte, Montana, a similar thing. It was a very windy area, and so they created a berm with some trees and vegetation to eventually create some shelter near their sports complex for baseball games. So the last picture I took here, this was 2 years ago in Shelby. So the first picture is the before of them just planting the spruce trees. And the second, this picture below, is how well they're doing. And you'll notice they actually had to put hay bales, straw bales, in front of the trees to help them establish, and that's for wind purposes because they weren't growing so great. But once they did that, they started growing really quickly. And, of course, it's snowing in Butte. That's the next picture I have. I couldn't get what the full growth looks like now, but that's just an angle that you'll see now how we designed this shelter belt to go near the baseball field. Sustainability. This is really important for many of the communities here. We want to be able to be less reliant on bringing things in from the outside and just kind of working with our own systems, right, within this microclimate. So the DNRC is also promoting grants in ways to create like edible fruit orchards within towns. So the picture on the right is in Polson, where we're doing some tribal trees and communities projects, and they are creating an edible forest garden that they've been working on for the last couple of years up in their school. There's also a project in Browning right now that we're working on the same thing. That's also, we're growing culturally significant trees for them to use that provides multiple benefits and functions and use. The other picture is the Forest Garden Park in Helena, Montana, and if you haven't seen it yet, they've done a lot of great work with it. So they have edible trees in this park, and they have a nice walking area, and you can volunteer and also grow food and just reap the benefits of having your own local area for food. And working with climate. So this is Amy sitting under this wonderful shade shelter. And this is the first of its kind that I know of. In fact, this has got national recognition as well for the design of this. And this is bringing much needed shade, utilizing local materials. In fact, we have a new shade shelter coming up in a few weeks that I'm really excited about that is utilizing urban wood from Missoula. The small, I think that's called a word cloud, that was actually what Missoulians came up with at this summit called the Health Equity Summit. And I just thought that was really interesting. What was important to Missoulians? Well, the big one, cooling effect, shade, decision-making, aging. I think we mean like an aging urban forest. Sequestration, vitality, health, simulated nature, green, shelter, stormwater, education. Those are the things that are important to almost all of us in all our communities. So I'll just leave you with my favorite quote, and that is that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. All right, Amy. Oh, did you need help?
I know, it's right.
Okay.
Okay, thanks again for being here. I know it's a beautiful evening out there, so we won't be in here too long. We can back to the tree. My affinity for trees came about when I was growing up in Ohio, and instead of climbing mountains, we could only climb trees. That's how we got into the clouds. It was really flat. But I have always loved trees. Fast forward a few decades, and I was doing my master's here at UM, and some of the research I did, not for my thesis, but was with Dick Hutto, researching the value of burned forests. And I bring this up because I think as we always think about how we're going to keep trees and forests living in this changing climate, we have to recognize that burned forests are part of the systems, and our natural wildland forests did evolve with fire, and they're supposed to burn. It just brings in a whole different flavor as we think about drought and the hot temperatures and climate change. There's some interesting studies. We could talk more at the end about the potential or the lack of ability for regeneration into some of these forests. But burned forests are still forests. There's a lot of birds and beetles and things that find these places home. And I grew, again, an affinity for all types of forests, even the ones that are dead, because usually things do grow back. Fast forward another decade or so, and I found myself running this Climate Smart Missoula. And what I thought I'd do in a handful of minutes here is talk a little bit about how this local climate effort thinks about trees and forests and has some ideas about how we're going to continue to work with trees and forests given climate change. So Climate Smart came about when a number of community members came together and said we should be doing more on climate change, both for mitigation and also for adaptation. And we had some summits. We had a whole bunch of people come together and said we have to do more. Climate change sort of grew out of these efforts. The mission is to engage our community in climate actions, catalyzing efforts to reduce our carbon footprint, build a resilient Missoula. And as we had these summits and these conversations, there were a number of sectors that we thought about in relation to climate change. Not just what you might think about, like at the top, renewable energy or transportation, but it's also local food and health, water, and urban and wildland forests and open lands. It's a whole focal area in a climate adaptation plan for our community to focus on because they're so important given climate change. So that's, again, we started in about 2015. That action plan, this is just a screenshot of our website, and if you go to the action plan and buckets, you can read a little bit about the approach that people, again, experts and leaders in our community have brought forward. And the vision that this group came up with, these experts, was that to envision our surrounding forests and open lands together with our urban forests are healthy and adapted to local climate conditions, contribute to climate mitigation, again, that's kind of reducing the footprint, and are supported by a broad sector of the community. So we'll work together so forests are resilient and can provide shade, and cool temperatures, carbon capture, clean water, diverse wildlife habitat, and renewable wood products. So our forests have a lot of things that they offer us, and there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle here that we need to both be involved in and pay attention to. So again, that kind of came to set the stage for some of the work that Climate Smart has done. One of the first projects that we came up with about the following year was a program we called Summer Smart, helping our community deal with changing summer conditions, because that's the climate that, as now the science supports what we just kind of had an inkling of, which is that, it's going to have more wildfires, wildfire smoke, and heat, especially in the summers. So we dove into that with Climate Smart, thinking about hotter days and warmer nights, and what can we do to help our community survive those and survive those well. So we kind of dove a few steps into that and said, we could use more shade. If all we do as it gets hotter is turn on more air conditioning, that's a lot of energy use. It kind of defeats, it's kind of a problem for climate change is the higher energy use with air conditioning. So could we have more trees? Because there's, of course, the benefit that trees offer around cooling, and also the mental health value that they bring us, that vegetation brings us. And we could talk more about that. I know Karen has a bunch of studies she's always speaking to around the value of trees to make us happier and more creative and innovative and all those things. And as we talk about climate change, when you have a lot of change, it's an anxious time for people. And trees are something that can help us with that mental stress and sort of reducing that stress if we spend time in nature, whether it's urban areas or wildland areas. So anyway, we came up with some ideas about how to do that, started working with Karen around helping people see, well, you can grow trees, you can plant them. How do you do it? When do you need to water them? That kind of thing. So I'm going to step back or jump forward, sorry, a little bit. I don't know if anybody's ever read the online magazine, or if they also have a print version of Anthropocene. It's a pretty neat journal that takes peer-reviewed articles and makes them sort of reader-friendly, and does a synopsis of some very technical studies, and so kind of pulls out the interesting things. And if you go to the Anthropocene, if you go to their website and just Google urban trees or trees, there's all kinds of stuff comes up. There was an article that came out just 3 days ago, and I know there are many articles like this, and it speaks to what Jamie was just speaking about. The article's title was City Trees Reduce Daytime Heat, but to curb sweltering nights, you need to minimize the pavement. And what they did was they were in Madison, Wisconsin, and they got on bikes and they just drove around, or rode their bikes all around the town and looked at the difference in temperatures between areas with trees and areas without. Or they just measured temperature around and then correlated that with canopy. And what they found was the difference between the hottest and coolest areas was about 3.5 degrees Celsius during the daytime. That's a pretty significant difference between places with trees and places without, 7 to 8 degrees. And it's similar to the difference between urban and rural temperatures. So that heat island effect is not universal across an urban environment. It's very much determined by where there are trees. So the magnitude of cooling at any given location depended on the amounts of canopy cover and also impervious surface, so those pavement and sidewalks. And then they also looked at, or the point that this study made was reducing nighttime temperature is especially important from a public health perspective. Reducing pavement as well as planting trees has to be part of cities' climate strategies. And if we think about health and vulnerable populations, if we don't have opportunities to cool at night and to cool our bodies down, especially as the temperature starts to increase, as Nick pointed out, it's very difficult, especially for elderly folks that live in maybe lower income housing where they don't have air conditioning or ways to cool their homes. So we need less pavement and more trees. How am I doing, Donna? Donna's the head of our Parks and Rec, and I didn't know she was going to be here, but there you go. So that was a study that just came out. There are many of those. It's really nice that the science correlates with what we kind of know intrinsically, that these trees are very valuable in our town. So stepping back a few years, when we first got started with Summer Smart, I worked with some folks at Parks and Rec, and we did this tree canopy assessment where we just had some volunteers and looked at maps and basically tried to figure out where we have trees across the board. And what you can see here is basically, this is tree canopy, it varies across our community. And I started thinking, and folks at Climate Smart, maybe catching up to what other people know, that we have some big inequities in our community about how much tree canopy we have. And we need to think about how we can all have the benefits of trees or start to break down some of those inequities, because they're real. That study, again, a number of us helped with, and then there's been a number of those that our community's involvement. It's wonderful. We have this university here. The university student just finished a master's, Julie Tompkins, and she made this really beautiful map looking at the urban forest based on the number of those. Each one of those dots is a public tree. And again, you can see they're not spread out evenly across our communities, which makes sense. There's more residential areas in some places and more industry or commercial in some places. But we kind of need trees everywhere if we want to keep ourselves cool and happy and healthy. This is just kind of zooming in. It's just a beautiful map. If you want a copy, I think it would make great art on your wall. And she went on to look at some mapping, you know, the canopy and what the land use, and also is overlaying that with some social determinants of health, different ways that we measure health. And again, trying to understand where there are pockets in our community that could use a boost, that could use both health and trees and pull those things together. So there's ongoing work that's, I think, that can help inform us how we as a community put forward our resources. There's groups in the health department who are now paying a lot of attention to trees as a way to help our community be healthier. So two more things at Climate Smart's involvement. One, we have started last fall a process of coming up with a climate adaptation plan for the city, the community, and also the entire county. So there's three groups, the three entities that are working on this. And we started in the summer and we developed this county-wide primer that basically is a lot of Nick's work. He helped with it, kind of looking at what is the climate change in our area, what's the projection, and how does how do we bring forward solutions to be more adapted to climate change. And what's interesting about this, of course, is that trees and forests are a big part of this. I'll provide a link here in just a minute, but we have this primer, I don't know, it's 30 or 30-some pages, that just sets the stage for what we know and what changes we think are going to come to about mid-century to our community and the entire county here. We took that primer and we got together a whole bunch of people, and maybe a few of you were here, but we did a big workshop to help identify vulnerabilities to climate change. So given the projections that Nick just laid out, who and what is vulnerable and what are the biggest problems we're going to see. And interesting what came out of this, we're just finishing a vulnerability assessment from bringing a bunch of experts together, is that we really are concerned about wildfires, which are forests nearby. Wildfire smoke is a big concern, although that's not just our forest, of course. The smoke comes from far away sometimes. But also looking at our urban areas and how important it is that we think about trees and what will happen to trees if we don't pay attention to them with hotter temperatures. So this vulnerability assessment is, again, who and what's kind of at risk, and now the plan is to put that out actually next week. And they'll let's see, I think I even have, it's on a website that Climate Smart hosts. It's on our website. You can go to Resiliency Planning if you're interested. You can get information about it. And then at the end of May, we're going to do another workshop and try to come up with strategies and solutions. And again, sprinkled through this effort from the primer to the vulnerability assessment and on to developing strategies. Trees, green infrastructure in the urban area, and also our wildland forests, they're just prominent in this effort. And if anybody wants to be involved in that or wants to provide input or learn more, you can go to that website or you can contact me. And so I guess I wanted to end my portion of this as the talk was, talking or, how do we act locally? And just a couple ideas to come up with. So we do need to be the voices for trees. Again, you can get involved in the climate resiliency planning effort I just mentioned. But there's other efforts that come through whether it's the university or our city, that need somebody to say, hey, don't forget the trees. Karen does this, but she could probably use some other voices. So maybe the downtown master plan. Are we actually advocating for, are we going to have enough trees downtown as we build up our downtown area? Budgets. We're doing budget season, and Parks and Rec needs money to replace our dying trees, the decadent trees, and they don't come for free, and they need the capacity for the staff to plant those trees. So do we need to show up at city council meetings and say, hey, the trees matter, our urban forestry matter, our open space program matter, and we should give Parks and Rec more money? How's that. And then, thinking a little bit broader, forest planning efforts. There's things we're talking a lot about the urban area, but always around Montana and beyond, there are forests, and there's an opportunity for advocates to step in and help the Forest Service or the managers consider climate change, consider the future as they make the management plans that they make. And that's, sort of worldwide, we have an opportunity to advocate. And then we need to vote for and support elected officials who actually value forests, ecosystems, and addressing climate change. We can't adapt our way out of climate change, and we need, of course, people that will help us come up with the policies to deal with basic CO2, which started this presentation. And so the last, and then a couple of things. There's tangible things, of course, we can do. There's being the advocates and the public voice, but we can also plant trees. We can help kids understand their value. We can give away trees. There's lots of great activities. We can help people understand that they do need to water their trees, especially in August and September, and we can't just, especially given climate change and the drier late summers that we're going to have. And then I thought I'd end it with just thinking a little more broadly. So we need to also think globally when we buy local tree products. And I think we're always thinking about urban trees and our, apples and buying local. But if you're like me, you wouldn't live without coffee. Coffee is at risk from climate change. However, coffee that is grown, coffee trees that are grown under shade trees have a much better ability to survive some of the climate challenges that are thrown at them when they are in shade-grown coffee. So buy shade-grown coffee, and that will make you, that will help survive, and that's true for chocolate too. So I thought I'd leave with coffee and chocolate. And that's all.
Yes.
Just leave the chocolate picture up. Now they mainly brought us all chocolate.
I know. Well, actually, so anywhere you go to a meeting with Karen, she usually brings.
I know. I didn't have chocolate for everybody, so I didn't bring it out. Good enough. Thank you so much. Wow. I do have questions, but I want to open up to see if any of you have any questions for our panelists to get started. Does anyone have any?
I'm afraid the ice here, and I've got quite a few questions.
Yeah.
Some comments. So I'm Adam Cohen, the staff artist. And the one thing that I see glaring in every one of your guys' presentations, I understand you guys see the urgency. I see it at the University of Montana, and I see it at the city of Missoula, is everybody likes trees, everybody wants to plant it, nobody wants to maintain them.
Right.
It's a big problem, and nobody wants to protect them. There's no enforcement. And we talked about building these communities, we talked about valuing the trees, we talked about the benefit, but the amount of damage and neglect and risk that we are assuming with all these trees that's occurring versus how much value is kind of absurd. And this is a big part of the conversation. And if this is going to happen, I think that needs to be at the forefront, because trees are not, you've probably seen research, Jamie, that trees are not beneficial unless they're maintained. They're maintained by professional people too. That's another part that gets left out. People think volunteers might be able to plant a tree, but the likelihood of that tree surviving is extremely low. In fact, it's so low that it's probably not even recommended to have volunteers planting trees, because you need a good amount of training. So it's more of a comment, but as I was saying, before we get on this, I wonder why it isn't discussed. These are sophisticated organisms in very adverse conditions, and for them to thrive and to get any benefit before we get started, they do need maintenance and professional maintenance.
Mm-hmm. It's a very good point. A lot of it, Adam, comes down to education. And people love their trees, we just don't know why. And a lot of us, I grew up in Kansas City. And I grew up in a very humid environment. It had clay soils, we had a lot of moisture. I never thought about watering trees growing up. Moving here, it's a completely different situation. We have so many transplants in Missoula from all over the country where people just didn't really have to think about watering trees.
Or they're so afraid to waste water.
Yes, that's another good point. And it is in educating people that they actually do take care. And it isn't just throwing a tree in the ground and it just magically is going to grow. And so I do know that as far as Trees for Missoula is concerned, we do a lot of outreach and education. I know DNRC does that as well.
And I agree that, education is the big question, is how do we get that out there? I mean, it's not just the public, it's professionals, it's university administrators, where it's almost impossible to get that information passed on to people, it seems like.
It's a lot
I
of
didn't know
talking
that
and
organization.
brainwashing.
I mean, that's another organization where,
Yeah, but I mean, we're small, and I think all we can do, and maybe Donna wants you to comment, but that, I mean, I put the little bullet up there, budgets, like, they need the support with the city, they need, you know, our tax dollars, if this is a priority to us, need to help support Parks and Rec.
There's a couple of opportunities coming up really soon with the rewriting the tree ordinance,
Yeah.
to save some teeth into all of the things that you're talking about, Adam. And then the other opportunity we have is Missoula now owns its water.
Yeah.
So our messaging is going out to every person who wants water. from Missoula
And we are
Water.
coordinating messaging with Missoula Water to get that, out. To educate them. Did you have something to add?
Well, I did, talking about the care of trees and, of course, budget being a constraint. I've noticed the City of Missoula Parks and Rec and the urban forester, I can give you a very specific location at the end of Eddy, where it intersects Arthur. They've taken down a number of trees over the years, about 10. Many of them weren't being taken care of by property owners, but they weren't dead yet. They still had canopies that were taking in CO2 and giving off oxygen, but they're all gone. So they planted 3 new trees, which I was grateful for. And I even took it upon myself to remind the property owner at the corner that tree would need some water.
Thank
and they
you.
were doing it. But they didn't put the little plastic tubes around them. So I've noticed this spring, 3 of them appear to be leaking out. One of them is completely girdled. My point being, if the city is going far enough to buy the trees and the labor to plant them, couldn't we just take the additional step to put those tubes up that protect them from the urban deer, of which we have many in this year?
I'm glad that you brought that up. That just was brought to our attention via a couple of different channels a few weeks ago. And that is now going to be protocol for when trees are planted in the Urban Forestry Division, by the Urban Forestry Division in our public
It's kind of a waste of
spaces.
those valuable dollars.
Absolutely.
And now I bet there won't be another tree planted in the one that's dead because of limited budget. And another thing, at the parks, I've also noticed that with all the new play equipment that has gone into many of our parks, which is wonderful, that all the trees around the playgrounds are cut. And maybe there's some sort of liability issue, but in Kiwanis Park especially, it's like a desert in the summer, the play equipment. I never see any children on those. There's ones that look like rocks and a bear, and they're very cool.
I can answer for you.
Yeah, why
So
don't
we have 12 brand new playgrounds in Missoula.
Right.
Thank you, Parks and Rec, for 12 new brand new playgrounds in Missoula. And a lot of those playgrounds do not have trees around them existing. So what Trees for Missoula and Missoula Parks and Recreation are doing every fall is we are planting trees around those playgrounds to eventually create shade.
Great.
That's one of our biggest goals, is around these brand new playgrounds, but we're also going to be building more shade shelters to go along commuter trails and at these brand new playgrounds. I do know of a couple of instances where trees had to be removed around playgrounds because they're very dangerous.
Oh.
So cottonwoods are the worst trees ever to put any person underneath. So there are a couple of situations where I do know that quite a few cottonwoods had to be removed. Kiwanis Park, we had some conifers that had to be removed, and they were just, it comes down to risk management. And we have certified risk managers that work for the city, and it's that liability, just that level of liability. We are concentrating on replacing trees with ones in those spaces so that the kids will have shade and
And of course,
around
shade
these perennials.
shelters work for providing the shade, but they're not taking in CO2, you know.
No, but I'll tell you what, these shade shelters are actually taking trees from the urban forest that are no longer able to give life
New life.
and give shade, and we're giving them new life.
Right.
So that's a good story.
And it does, well, and it does keep that carbon intact.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's easy to, we all want more, but we do have to think about that as, again, we elect our city council and we think about priorities in terms of budgets. It's really hard. The city, city finances are challenged because of the state and what they allow us to do. That's a whole, we could go down that road. But I also think we should remember that there's a lot of opportunities for businesses and for residents to make trees both planting, and thank you, carrying them a bigger priority. It's talking to neighbors. It's, maybe you have plenty of trees and your neighbor doesn't have any and they're elderly, and maybe you could go plant them a tree. I mean, I think what we all want to do is kind of grow this by, by building that out and helping businesses know, nobody's going to come to your shop if they have to go through a really hot.
In the library,
Yeah.
they took down, and the old library, there were so many trees
Right,
taken down.
right, and there's a-
Anytime
yeah.
construction,
Yeah, but
lose trees.
right, and our opportunity and our challenge and opportunity is to regrow that and know that it's not going to happen overnight, but we do have to make that a priority, both in private and public spaces, I guess.
Yeah, and by getting the word out. Kelly, did you have
I'm
a
hoping
question?
too, like when they're replanted, and what I'm seeing is they're not putting in any larger planting boxes. It would be nice to have some sort of spec on growing areas for the tree for survival.
It'd be wonderful if you made comments for the downtown master plan when that is coming up for public comment. There is a requirement that does exist, but some commercial owners are able to get variances from there, where they do have suspended pavement systems. And the New Merc Hotel actually has, every tree around the New Merc Hotel is supported by suspended pavement system that Jamie was talking about, where we have
So that the roots can grow
so
under
the roots can grow underneath the sidewalk. They can reach their full potential. The tree that Jamie showed at the Missoula Art Park is actually a maple. It's going to become a full-size maple tree in downtown. All of those honey locusts downtown should be ginormous by now, but they're growing these tiny little cones, these little holes that are these tiny cones down there. And so we are working on this, and we do need people to make comments when we're having these plans come up. And the downtown master plan is the next big one that is coming up, that we need to say there needs to be trees and we need to give them space.
Then let me know. But the
Yeah.
other question is, I think choosing trees that are tolerating more drought.
Yeah,
too,
I didn't mention that.
Because I thought we have the irrigation for trees, but I'm thinking, why would we plant trees that need irrigation for long term? Why not choose trees that would be more drought tolerant and habitat?
Yeah. I should have touched upon that more because I wanted to stress, about tree diversity as well, because obviously we have some imbalance even in Missoula. There's, the rule is, it's called the 10-20-30 rule, and you don't want to have any more, really any 10% of any species in particular present in your urban forest. So anything above 10%, we have quite a few of those maples. But we want to, and ash actually are getting up there as well in Missoula. But we want to stress climate hardy trees that do well here, that can, grow and thrive. And it's really, really hard to find a tree that can actually survive in the harsh conditions of a hardscape, and also is, good with not having much water. It's a really interesting balance that we have to find suitable, adaptable species for what we have in our current climate. So with irrigation, yes, trees will still need, the watering, and it's a matter of proper watering as well. So we notice that trees just don't get watered correctly most of the time or adequately. So it's another education thing. And I was just going to mention too, Adam, with your question about tree care, it's an interesting balance because we have, opportunities like revising tree ordinances and doing the enforcement side of things, but also citizens don't love to be told what to do. And so we have a hard balance. We want to try to balance it between education and enforcement, and sometimes it's just finding that right balance and mixture and just having them be involved with the whole process. So from the beginning, that's what we're finding is the most success.
It is hard for tree lovers to see bad things being done to trees out there.
Well, I've seen
I hear
that
you.
doesn't work for
Yeah.
people for motivation.
Yeah.
Good comment about this drought.
Yeah.
But that brings, can I ask?
Okay.
Ties into
Yeah.
Nick, and this brings up something you're talking about, trees that are going to be able to thrive. And this is another thing that's a big issue with urban forestry is how are we going to select trees for mid-century? That they're planning right now, trying to select trees based on what what Montana is like 50 years ago. and they're saying native trees, they're picking out these things and hardinesses, and I don't know, when you're talking about averages, how much extreme is within those averages? It could be an average of 6 degrees, but it could be, how much you're dealing with a very high low in that period of time. I mean, is there a way to even be able to select trees down the road? Are they going to be saying, finding a section of trees or plant vegetation that can handle? That's what I see with growing up in Missoula, Montana. It's not just moderate, it's extreme and rapid extreme.
Yeah, so I guess I won't, it's a really hard question and not one that I'm qualified to answer, but Jamie, you can take a stab at it, or Karen or Amy. But the one thing I'll add, I guess a couple things, is when we look at those temperatures, a couple things to keep in mind is that is the average projection among 20 different models. So some of them say, bigger change, some of them say less of a change. We don't really know which are right. We know that, like I said, we have 100% agreement that we're going to see increased temperatures. So that's something we can have a lot of confidence moving forward, making decisions. In terms of the water, I'll kind of tie in my answer with what with the previous question. We're in Missoula proper. We actually have a really resilient water resource here, and we're lucky. And most of the state is not as fortunate as we are, but we do sit on top of the Missoula Aquifer, and we've done some kind of preliminary analysis with
being Nick.
with the county climate resiliency plan, just looking at, okay, well, in the past, how has our aquifer responded to summer temperatures and summer precipitation? Those are our two really big concerns. And for the most part, it seems to be pretty resilient. Where it doesn't do as well is in like multi-year drought, but we don't have a lot of evidence to suggest we're going to start seeing like big 3, 4, 5-year droughts or increasing. Of course, we've always had drought. We'll continue to have drought. There will be bad ones in the future, but whether or not those are from climate change, we can't draw those connections. So the bottom line is that that's something that we can play with a little bit. We have some water resources here. So drought is serious, and certainly outside of Missoula, and the rest of Montana, drought is a big concern. But I think here, when we're talking about our urban trees, we have some opportunity. Let's water them. We have a good water resource.
I'm glad you brought up the aquifer. That was going to be my question I was going to bring up if you didn't bring that up. And we had a discussion before, and Nick had brought up the fact that we have a resilient aquifer, and we were talking about trees as green infrastructure and being able to capture our stormwater and be able to, also our green space holds our snow. Our precipitation, we get a lot of our precipitation mostly in snow and not just in water. And so we do, towards the end of the summer, have a lot of people who, they're really conscientious about their water use. And they're stop watering their lawns because we know that their lawns can come back. But we're worried because they aren't watering their trees anymore, because trees really can't come back. If that tree is dead, it's just not going to come back if you stop watering it. What can you all speak to about if someone says, well, I don't want to water my tree because we live in an arid environment, I want to save my trees, what would be your answer? Don't all start at once.
Get over it. No, I think we have sometimes to take the time to explain some of the things about how our aquifer works, different than a surface water, and the benefits of those trees. I think it's just being able and willing to have those conversations. I don't think it's hard once you can get to the place of having that conversation. I worry that we just don't have them enough. And we've thought about billboards, we've thought about public service announcements. It just seems like we need to put it out there more so people are so that there's almost peer pressure to do things better. I don't know that I have anything. There's a silver bullet, is there? I don't know.
If we knew it, I think we'd be doing it. I really stress when I see, when we reach into the drought situations and people are getting nervous about what to water. I always say, if you have to choose between watering your grass or your trees, always choose the trees. Like you said, the trees will not be able to bounce back. The grass will. Also, trees help reduce the amount of water needs that grass has. So when trees shade the grass areas, they don't require as much water. They're not as borne down by the heat. So it's all these reasons. Yes, and it's proper watering. So a lot of people think that sprinklers are decent to actually do some good for the trees when they're actually not. What trees require deep, long, slow soaks. And so that's usually, drip irrigation. That's why we recommend drip irrigation versus sprinklers, as well as timing of when you water. But yeah, it's proper watering, and in fact, that's why we do a lot of studies about proper irrigation for landscapes, for urban landscapes specifically. And so anything that doesn't really reach the atmosphere, sprinklers evaporate, the water. That's also a water efficiency tip that we can always give them, is just use keep the water low to the ground if you can, and that'll minimize evaporation.
One other thing associated with that, and I just lost my concentration. I just lost my track. Okay, does anyone have another question? Yeah.
Yeah, this might be kind of a dumb question, I don't know, but have there been studies done, the current trees that we have in our city? If we're going to have these climate changes, if we're going to have different amounts of moisture and such, have there been studies done to see how the current trees are going to do and fare with that, or are we going to end up losing trees, and if we have flooding and stuff, has that been assessed at all?
For urban trees specifically? So we're just beginning. That's the great thing about it, is now we have data. So we can start using it and keeping it up to date. So this inventory, the statewide inventory that we have, is constantly being updated. And it depends on the local communities to submit their information to us. But the state maintains a statewide database. And as the years go by, we'll be able to track and monitor that and decipher, are there certain species that are starting to decline? Are we noticing large amounts of removals or decay? And so we are seeing trends, and it's kind of cool. Immediately, like you saw, just right off the bat, we saw trends with species composition. So that's the exciting thing. And no, that's not a dumb question. That's an awesome question. Because I'm excited about it.
You guys already knew that information, but I mean,
yeah. But are we going to be able to plan, like Adam was asking, are we going to be able to plan? Because we know we get the greatest benefits from trees when they're full size. And so we want trees to grow in an urban setting longer than 30 years.
Exactly.
And so if we know by mid-century that our minimum temperature, which our USDA plant hardiness zones are based on our minimum temperatures, is going to be rising 3 to 7 degrees in the next 50 years or 30 years, then we're going to be in zone 5. We're in zone 4 now. So do we start planning for planting in zone 5 trees, or the trees that can do both 4 and 5?
Yeah.
Is that kind of where you were?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Seems smart to me.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of this, it is, and I think we are at a place where we finally have some really, not finally, but the information we have at the scale that we have it, and the ability to downscale to a more localized area is pretty exciting, and we have some of this expertise here. So the onus is now on planners and advocates to use that.
And then planting in those areas, that we might be losing those trees.
Right. I mean, the harder questions come when people start thinking about the wildland forest, and do you actually facilitate movement, and people, do you actually pick up trees and plant them in somewhere they're not in anticipation of 20, 50 years? It's much easier to muck around in the city.
It really
because
is.
we're already,
And
give some things a try. It's much more difficult when you're talking about those wildland areas, and there's a lot of ethics and craziness.
And we did that a lot when we were working with non-industrial private forest landowners that were impacted by wildfire. And we did a lot of work with helping them rehab and recovery after fire. And that was one of the questions. And this was, I've been retired for about 7 years, so this is like 8 to 10 to 12 years ago, when a lot of this discussion was just getting started. And so what do you tell them to plant? So they're in a large zone. 50 years from now, are they still going to be in a large zone? So you're rolling the dice on economics and for some of these families, it was, their, part of their livelihood was managing the forest.
Right.
And so it gets real complicated trying to advise them on what do they say, the statistical reliability diminishes rapidly as you move forward from today. Projecting what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, I mean.
So
we
you don't know.
we
You've
don't know.
got statistics and all that. And I wonder, too, if that, in looking at urban, we put a lot of money into helping struggling Montana communities with their urban forestry programs. Fort Benton, Glendive, Manhattan, some of those places. And so one of the questions I ask myself, thinking locally, if you happen to be local in Glendive, do you have a future for urban forestry? And how do you have to manage that differently, where you create micro pockets of urban forestry management rather than trying to manage for the whole community? Because do you have the water? Do you have the money?
Yeah.
How much can you afford to project on this statistical uncertainty? So.
They're hard questions, but what's the trade-off too in terms of health? The benefits, as you spouted out a bunch of benefits. So I don't know what every community is going to have to wrestle with that. Because it's different.
But I think that makes it more complicated.
Sure.
Because if we talk about Missoula with our aquifer and our climate zone, that's it's nestled quite nicely in a productive. I mean, you can go a zone or two either side and still have quality urban forest if you guess right on the trees.
Right.
But if you're someplace, that's on an ecotone that's going over into sage or desert or something like that, creates an interesting quandary.
It does.
For those, especially for like Jamie and her program that's trying to advise these communities and trying to decide on how to spend limited dollars. That's a real struggle with this whole climate change.
Right. I mean, I think we have to look
where you have to prioritize based on something. I don't know. Sorry,
Did you have something to add?
get off in a bizarre.
No, I mean, I guess because I deal a lot with water stuff, and water gets really, really complicated, and we do have a lot of uncertainty around. I mean, you start talking about drought. Drought is a combination of so many different things, and there's many different types of drought. But it is like the third time I've said it, and I'll just say it again. Like, we have a lot of certainty that temperature is going to increase, and it seems like when we're talking about these plant hardy zones, like those are based on temperature, right? Largely, and when we have this, we should be taking advantage of the certainty in which we sort of know.
It's going to get hotter.
Yeah, it is going to get hotter, and I think it is time to be making decisions based on those projections. I mean, we have a lot of confidence around those.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I guess I just want to emphasize that again.
It is happening.
Yeah. I mean, I showed you the plot of the temperatures the last, since 1996. It's all been hotter than average. Like temperature has increased. It will and it will continue to increase.
We've got a question back there.
Oh, yeah, so, given the increase in trees, do you have recommendations for, private citizens? We want to plant trees in our neighborhoods, what we should be planting?
Yes, they do.
Yeah, we do.
There are, sorry.
No.
There's people out there who do know.
Come on over.
Yeah,
I mean, the Trees for Missoula Parks and Rec, on their websites, there's recommendations. And, I think we'll have to start also, looking to some communities to the south. We can make some recommendations. And then there's a difference also, too, between a public tree and a private tree. I know the Native Plant Society has maybe some different recommendations because you're not so worried if your aspen trees are going to go wonky or some things that might be more desirable for individuals. Like I love aspen, and I know branches are going to break, but I'm not worried about somebody's head getting whacked, right? So but I think we need to layer some of those things together. What's public, and then some opportunities private, and thinking about some of those native
And it's called the Approved Street Tree List for Missoula, and it was created by our current urban forester, and it's basically the trees that can handle our current environment and our current climate. With our little bit warmer temperatures, I would say most of the trees in there would do well if we went a little bit 5 degrees warmer. But the things like the aspen, they may not do as well. You know, I grew up in Kansas City. We don't have aspen there, and that's a 5 zone, zone 5B. We're only 4B. So I think it might affect some of our more native plants than are the ones that we're introducing than the ones that we're bringing in, actually.
And, yeah, but with, on private lands too, I think there's a lot of shrubs too that become tree-sized, and I think if you look to the southwest, that's a lot of what you see growing in some of those communities, and so maybe we just need to expand our view of what it means to vegetate an area to cool it, and it doesn't all have to be these towering trees. There are other ways. I'm sure there'll be some artificial trees coming along shortly that suck in more CO2, and they look like, I don't know, but.
And when you said, when you were talking about the natives, though, I think they probably are going to be hardy. I mean, if you're putting the maple in and a ponderosa pine, you know, for a period of time, you're going to have plenty of, it's going to
be around for a while.
And you're also, if you put something like that in, I'm not a total Nazi native person, but I think, but if you think about it, if you're not going to have to water a plant, then why don't you put something in like that that is drought tolerant for those neighborhoods?
Right, you know, and
in
an urban environment, we do need the diversity, and what we do tell people is all trees need water to become established.
Right.
And then once they're established, you can pull back on some of the species varieties. We, on average in Missoula, we get about 11 to 14 inches of rain a year. Our shade trees in Missoula average need 25 to 35 inches of precipitation a year. So they do require supplemental watering. The benefits, though, that I know Amy and Jamie have brought this up multiple times, the benefits that we realize from these trees, from watering them, from getting these great big trees, way outweigh the water if we do it efficiently and effectively. They outweigh the amount of water that we need to put into them if we do it right.
No, I'm agreeing with that. I'm just saying, if you have a problem with people not watering their area, then that might be
something that would be eventually more drought tolerant once they're established.
Maybe water vigilantes that go around at night and
That brings up the same problem, is it's not just water, it's soil. And
native
once
soil.
again,
Native. Yes, I was
this
going to bring
valley
that up.
had no large forest of ponderosa down in it. Most of these urban environments were built right in the riparian, along rivers. You got there maybe some cottonwoods that were able to utilize that. But we're building where there was not fencing.
We don't have the soil capacity for them. We've got to bring the soil in.
The soils are not what ponderosa pine are supposed to grow in either.
Right. Just grasses and bitterroot flowers, really, is what was here. But we know to have a livable environment, we have to have trees around us to have a livable environment. You had a question?
Well, I was just going to say, just informally, as I walk around Missoula, and I do a lot of walking, I've noticed that between about a quarter and a third of the trees that are planted most recently aren't making it, and it's because they're not being watered. And you were talking about that now that we own the water company, they're going to send out educational information?
You know, they send out newsletters about quarterly. We're hoping to get a little bit in the July one about watering the trees. We're working on a campaign, a Please Water the Trees campaign all around. And something else that we're starting this year with the new tree planting is we're going to have volunteers follow the tree planting with door hangers to remind people that those trees need to be watered and how to water them efficiently and effectively as a little reminder.
And also along with that, I've noticed out at Fort Missoula, around their parade ground, where their old trees are starting to die and will soon be gone, that they have planted new trees in the shade of those trees. And I'm wondering why we're not doing more of that on our city streets, like before they take out the trees, which I see a lot of them being taken out since I live in the university area, and each one breaks my heart.
Yeah, I know.
But they're not utilizing the shade from that tree to establish another one before they take it out. I don't understand that with the dry, hot summer season.
I can try to answer that. The trees that were originally planted, especially in the older areas of our city, they were planted too closely together to begin with. Their root systems are they're in there. To get a new tree in between them, it takes a lot of planning, and so we want to make sure that our trees are they're spaced well, so they have enough light and air, so that they're healthy as they grow. Trees don't really thrive in shade, and so, they really wouldn't do very well if we planted them in the shade. When trees are being removed, as much as possible, they're being replaced one for one tree. But to put them, it'd be very difficult to put them in between the trees right now, and then they'd be shaded.
So at the fort, when they're doing that, are those trees gonna make it then? Or the new one, I mean, they look like they are.
I think those trees are soon to be coming out. I think the bigger trees are,
Gonna go soon.
they're going to be going soon. So the little ones will be fine. They'll thrive.
I mean, they look like they're doing really well.
Yeah.
I just thought that might be an option for establishing trees in our dry hot climate.
Getting them
Like the hay
going.
bales and views that Jamie was talking about, that those trees weren't doing well, because they gave them a little shelter and, but.
Right, yeah. The harsh Butte climate. Did you have anything to add to that?
I mean, that's a really good question, and when it is suitable, I do recommend for, trying to phase in new trees so that the impact won't be as dramatic or traumatic for the people, the residents. So when it is possible, we totally support that. It is a good planning procedure as well. So it's something that
There is an
it
interesting
depends.
story. Higgins, he actually on Pine Street, he and Warden brought in the first Norway maples, and he cut down those darned cottonwood trees because they were shading his Norway maples on Pine Street. And I have a great picture of him in a car in front of his house on Pine, and there's this tiny little maple, these ginormous cottonwoods. I thought, oh, those were gone pretty soon thereafter. Yeah.
Did you have a question?
Yeah.
I just wanted to quickly say that I would totally encourage, maybe you always do this, but, not just to say water your trees, but how to water your trees, because it's a mystery to me,
I know, I screwed it up last year.
I didn't know to water my trees, and, I can just say that if I'm still a little mystified by how to water my trees, so, we need some facts.
Treesformissoula.org has great tree watering information, how to do it.
And water your trees.
And, how to water efficiently, effectively. When our tree watering door hangers that we're putting out on the reverse, how to water your trees effectively, efficiently. I try to take pictures of, whenever I see someone watering a tree well, I take a picture of it and put it on Instagram. Trying to spread the word, but
I know what it is. Those silver tubes that you're talking about.
Silver cells,
How expensive are those? Is that an expensive investment?
The infrastructure that it was at first. Bringing the first one in here, it's kind of like the more we do this, the more common we make it. We establish a good relationship with the people that we purchase these from, and the designs become more easy to create. So it was pretty expensive for this.
It was a little pricey for that one tree. We're learning, though, that we're able to design suspended pavement systems for suspending the pavement. We're able to design them so that they can incorporate more than one tree for a system.
So if you wanted to, say, a place really needed it for university and maybe wanted 3 spots, that would have at least one tree in it. I mean, what is there an estimate of cost? What was the cost of the one you showed?
I'm trying to remember. The grant was $12,000.
The grant was $12,000.
The grant was $12,000.
Yeah.
Was it James Urban that did the solar cells?
He's one of the researchers that kind of helped discover
Did you connect, the ones that were over by the Mercantile, did they connect those solar cells trees together?
I believe.
No.
I thought they did. Oh,
Well, if you see how far apart they are spread, the trees are so
Oh.
far apart. They're just for each tree.
But that is actually what they should be
I
doing.
don't know for sure, but I would add one thing about the cost of silver cell. The initial capital investment is significant compared to throwing them in a small box with dirt. But if you consider the impacts to the sidewalks and replacing them
And how expensive they are.
frequently, it's massively less expensive.
So long term.
Long-term
Long-term.
investment.
We always look at
Thank
things
you.
for the long term and the life size of the tree.
It's worth it.
Those are an amazing investment.
They are awesome.
Do they look for stormwater management with those too? Do they calculate or look for that for holding?
There's some of that. I
Mhm.
think some opportunity that we will see coming forward from city leadership is looking more at the entire system. So when can trees serve as stormwater as opposed to concrete vaults? When can we surface drain? So a lot of the infrastructure in Port Missoula is actually against current city code because we use surface drainage and swales.
Huh.
So we're trying to encourage that kind of design throughout. And I think we have some unique opportunities again, now that we have water, sewer, all of utilities,
Yeah.
with right of way.
Stormwater.
And we have some very wonderful leaders in public works right now
Yeah.
who would like to see more of the green infrastructure that Jamie was talking about. So we're really excited at Parks about the potential.
Awesome, that's a good positive note to end it on.
We have a carbon forest at the wastewater treatment plant. It's growing properly.
Yes.
And it seems to me that if we own that and we own the composting, that we could grow commercial urban trees for the city and mulch them. Because trees are expensive.
Well, we're already kind of doing that. We haven't started that. We've started an urban forest gravel bed. So we've begun in a small scale where we bring in bare root trees every April, and we planted them about 3 weeks ago. And in October, volunteers, we pull them out, and my volunteers plant them in the fall, and we have a really good survival rate with the way that we're planting them.
And it's in the same site.
Excuse me?
It's not at the same site.
And it's at the wastewater treatment facility. The one thing that we're looking at, we're trying to, Trees for Missoula and Parks and Recreation, we're looking at land and soil. You need a lot of soil and a lot of land to have a traditional nursery to grow those. The best soil in Missoula is Missoula County Airport Authority. They have the best soil and depths, and that would be I've talked to the mayor. I'm like, if you ever want to help me get some land out there, that'd be awesome. So we are working toward that way because we can grow the stuff that would be best for our area. We're hardening it in our area. We're able to take care of it for ourselves. So it absolutely is a goal for our city.
Where are most of the bare root trees that you've been are moving out and planting in the community? Where are they planting? In parks?
They're going in parks. They're going around playgrounds to shade the playgrounds, and they're also going in our boulevards. Last fall, we followed behind a big sidewalk project, community sidewalk project.
So we were actually to volunteer and help out, but I guess I was a big late adult.
Oh, dang it! Yeah, we plant in boulevard spaces, in public spaces, and in parks.
Okay.
Yeah. If we don't have any more questions, I'd like to thank Nick and Jamie and Amy for bringing us all this wonderful information and great discussion and fodder for us to just really think about and hopefully get out there and take some action and do something. We know it's going to get hotter, and we know that planting trees cool our area, and we just have to take care of them. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.